Hey folks, before we begin the modeling process, we're going to take a brief talk about shooting reference first. And reference really is the secret weapon that professionals use to make their modeling work look really, really good. Ideally, we'd be shooting in a studio, and ideally we'd have professional lights and green screen and all of those nice things. But in reality, for most people, that's not achievable. So when I was looking around my house, I was looking for an area that was fairly clean and clear, and I found this kind of worktop. And the reason that I picked it was because the lighting overhead was relatively diffuse. It's coming from a long, thin fluorescent bulb, so I'm not going to get sharp shadows. And that's probably the number one thing, really. I need to get a lot of light so that I can see my objects clearly through the camera. I want a kind of clean, clear area if possible. Not great here. I've got a kettle and a toaster in the background, but you have to make do. Ideally, you would like adjustable lights, and ideally you'd like a surface with adjustable height so you can shoot from above and below. Again, ideally we should be shooting on a tripod and with a decent camera, which would be hooked up to a monitor or a laptop so that we could see if our shots are in focus. And usually you don't have a kettle in shot, but you do need a kettle nearby for making a cup of tea or coffee while you're doing this, because it does take a little bit more time than you might think. Okay, now I shot the reference with a DSLR. I think a prosumer camera, you can pick them up for kind of 300 quid, 400 quid, is well worthwhile. So photography itself is a very useful skill to have when doing CG. If you're going to shoot a lot of reference, be it textures or direct reference, you're going to need a decent camera. Often when we are using professional cameras, we will shoot in a file format called RAW, which is what I've done here. Now, there's some advantages and disadvantages to that. If you don't know what it is, you don't need to worry about it too much. Shooting in JPEG is fine for most scenarios, I guess. But RAW does give you some advantages. Some disadvantages as well. So when we shoot in RAW, we get slower, bigger files. The workflow is a little bit more convoluted. We do get a wider dynamic range, so we get more data to play with, and it's easier to sharpen and expose properly. So if you understand what that means, it's a good idea to shoot in RAW. If you don't worry about it. Just try and take the very best, clearest, cleanest photos that you can with good lighting that's in focus. Now, because I did shoot in RAW and I shot quite a few different little objects while I was at it, I need to be a little bit organized in terms of my workflow. In this case, I'm using Adobe Bridge to try and organize the files. And Adobe Bridge is an okay file management system. You could also potentially use Lightroom, or there is iRefran Viewer and a couple of other ones kicking around that you can download as well. If you're going to be shooting a lot of photographs, this is really a necessity, I think. In this case, Bridge is going to do me just fine. You can see that my camera actually shoots JPEG and these .nef files, which are RAW file format. I have 2 copies of each file. I can filter by file type over on the left-hand side. You can see the arrow pointing at it there. And you can see that I've shot a piece of cutlery, just a fork. And actually I shot probably about 3 times as many photos as here, and quite a few of them were out of focus. It is more difficult to get sharp focus than you might think. I can test the focus here in Bridge by clicking on the actual image, and it gives me a little bit of a close-up, which is what you can see on the right-hand side. To get images properly in focus, you do need to have a good lot of light. You do need to have fairly steady arms or a tripod, and you do need to take your time. And I would advise, how I shoot is I take a shot and then I pull back a little bit and take another shot, and then I push forward a little bit. So I'm varying my distance all the time. So I'm moving when I shoot. And then I'm kind of guaranteed to at least get something that's going to be in focus. I'm looking to get even light. There isn't any sharp shadows here. I use the little red folder in the background just in case I need to separate it out. I don't in this case, but it would be easy to separate it out in Photoshop if I did need to. I do need to do a white balance here. You can see that in this particular shot, that little chunky fork that's there is actually not yellow, it's white, and that's because the white balance on the camera is all over the place. So I used Camera Raw here to do a quick white balance. by using the eyedropper tool and picking the white of the fork and then adjusting my exposure and clarity just a small little bit, and my temperature and tint. Okay, again, if you're not using Camera Raw, you could do all of that within Photoshop. You can set the white balance within the levels tool, and you could just balance it up by eye. Okay, not vital for getting reference, I think, but it's good to just balance up and have a kind of a workflow, and is useful if we're going to use these images for texturing and kind of painting the models later on.